It's amazing how some figures just loom large, even years after they're gone. And Steve Jobs, I mean, he's definitely one of those. You think iPhone, you think Mac, Pixar. His influence is just everywhere. But the thing is, once you start digging a little deeper past the keynotes and that iconic black turtleneck, you find a story that's way more complicated. It's not always pretty, not always straightforward.
It's true. And I think that complexity, that constant push and pull between undeniable brilliance and, well, let's be honest, some pretty well-documented personal struggles, that's what keeps drawing us back to these figures, keeps us trying to figure them out. It's more than just the products they made. It's about the forces that shaped them, made them who they were.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to dive deep, but we're going to keep it focused. So, set aside the massive biographies for now. We're going to take a look at Steve Jobs' history as it's presented in the 2015 movie, just called Steve Jobs. Now, it's a drama, right? It's a film, a cinematic interpretation, but it's based on Walter Isaacson's biography, which was, super in-depth and tons of interviews. So it gives us this really concentrated view of some absolutely key moments in his life and his career.
And what I think the film does really well is the way it's structured. It doesn't try to do a whole, birth to death thing. Instead, it focuses on 3 major product launches.
Yeah.
And these launches, they're like pressure cookers. You see Jobs under incredible stress, and the way he reacts, the way he handles those moments, it tells you a lot about his character and how his relationships evolved over time.
Yeah. Right. So today, we're primarily using this 2015 film as our source. We're going to explore how it portrays Steve Jobs' history, specifically through those 3 acts you mentioned. And yeah, we'll talk about what the critics thought, what people who knew him said about the accuracy. But really our main goal here is to pull out the most fascinating, the most insightful stuff from his journey, at least as the film depicts it. We want to give you, the listener, a deeper understanding of this guy, a guy whose impact, let's face it, you feel every time you pick up your smartphone. We want to do it without getting bogged down in every single detail of his life. So, ready to jump in. Act 1, 1984, the launch of the Macintosh.
Yeah, they really throw you right in, don't they? The Macintosh launch is like minutes away. The voice demo is a total disaster, and Jobs is all over Andy Hertzfeld to fix it no matter what. Mm-hmm. And right there, you see that intensity, that almost obsessive drive for perfection. And I think it's more than just wanting to launch a good product. It had to be flawless, even if that meant just hammering his team.
Yeah, and there's that line, almost like a casual mention about maybe using the Macintosh 512K, the prototype, to fake the demo. It kind of makes you wonder, right? Where's the line between having this unwavering belief in your vision and maybe bending the rules a little, maybe being a little unethical to get there? I mean, the 512K, by the way, was a more powerful version of the Mac, so even then there were these different capabilities going on behind the scenes.
Absolutely. It speaks to the high stakes involved, right?
Yeah.
And maybe even a certain ruthlessness in the way Jobs went after what he wanted.
Yeah.
And then alongside this super intense professional drama, you've got this really personal conflict with Lisa Brennan Jobs and Chris Ann Brennan. His refusal to acknowledge Lisa, especially when you contrast it with the groundbreaking tech he's about to launch, it's really jarring. It forces you to grapple with this duality in his character.
Yeah, it's tough to watch those moments when he does connect with Lisa, even briefly, showing her McPaint, agreeing to some support. But then he pulls back, shuts down, he can't fully accept her. It paints this picture of a guy wrestling with being a father with all these personal responsibilities while also trying to, change the world.
Another thing that really stands out in this first act is the tension with Steve Wozniak. Wozniak just wants a simple acknowledgement of the Apple II team during the presentation, and Jobs, he's just dismissive, completely focused on the new thing, the future. And it's not just about a product launch, right? It speaks to a deeper clash in values. Jobs, he's all about the future, always moving forward. Sometimes, it seems, at the cost of recognizing the foundation that got them there. It makes you think about philosophies of innovation, of teamwork, stuff you still see playing out in tech companies today.
It does. Okay, let's jump ahead a few years. 1988. Totally different vibe now. Macintosh didn't exactly take over the world like everyone thought it would, and Jobs has been forced out of Apple. The launch of the NXT computer, this feels like a make or break moment for him. Like he has to prove himself all over again.
Yeah, there's definitely a sense of Jobs trying to reclaim his position, to show everyone he's still a force in tech. But those personal conflicts, they haven't gone away. His relationship with Chris Ann is still incredibly strained. And there were some Some pretty harsh words exchanged. We also see a much more direct confrontation with Wozniak, who, by the way, is not afraid to say he thinks the next T is going to fail. And he really challenges Jobs' whole narrative about his own role, his own contributions to, the history of computing.
That part where Jobs uses the conductor analogy when Wozniak's questioning his technical abilities, that's so revealing. It's like he's saying, look, I may not play every instrument, but I'm the one leading the orchestra. It tells you a lot about how he saw himself, right? As this visionary leader who brings all these talented people together.
Right. He sees the big picture, the overall vision, and he can guide and inspire people, even if he's not the one, down in the weeds implementing every detail. That kind of leadership, it can be super effective, but it can also cause friction when the musicians, so to speak, when they feel like their contributions aren't being appreciated.
For sure. And then you've got John Scully showing up again. And the film gives us a different perspective on Jobs leaving Apple. It wasn't just a firing, right? It was a fundamental disagreement about where the company should go. And the board, they ended up siding with Scully's plan to stick with the Apple II, which was making more money, after the Macintosh struggled a bit. For me, this highlights how even these visionary leaders, they can butt heads with the reality of running a business, the bottom line.
Definitely. The film gives you that context. It shows that it was really a clash of visions, of strategies that led to that split. And Scully's warnings about the board getting restless, it underlines the difficulty Jobs had, trying to push his unconventional ideas in a more traditional corporate environment.
Right. And through it all, you've got Joanna Hoffman. She's so perceptive. She seems to really get Jobs, sometimes better than he gets himself. It's in this 1988 part where she figures out that the next T might not just be about building an amazing computer. It might be Jobs' way to get Apple to buy them out, to bring him back. What's interesting is how she can see past what he's saying to what he really wants.
Hoffman, the way she's portrayed, she's like this anchor for Jobs. She can challenge him, offer a different perspective. And yeah, her realizing that the next T is like a Trojan horse, that says a lot about how well she understood his long game, how badly he wanted to get back to Apple.
All right, let's jump ahead again. 10 years this time, 1998. The iMac is about to launch. Jobs is back at Apple. And you can feel it, right? This comeback energy. Professionally, things are great. The iMac is projected to be huge, but personally, things are, well, they're still complicated.
You're right. The film keeps weaving together these professional successes with the ongoing struggles in his personal life. You go from Jobs being thrilled about the iMac's potential, right, to him being furious that Lisa's mother sold the house he bought them. That contrast, it really underscores that internal conflict he has, this need for control. It's not just in his work life. It spills over into his relationships.
Yeah. And in this act, you see the people around him trying to break through some of the walls he's built up. Hoffman reminds him about him threatening to cut off Lisa's tuition. And then you find out Hertzfeld's been secretly paying it, even suggested therapy for Jobs. Yeah. It shows you this support network, people trying to nudge him towards, well, maybe being a little more compassionate, doesn't it? It makes you think about how even the most driven people, they need people who can offer different perspectives, who can just be there for them.
Absolutely. Those moments with Hoffman and Hertzfeld, they show a different side of Jobs, a more human side. Hertzfeld paying that tuition, especially without saying anything, that says a lot about the people around Jobs. They cared, even with all the pressure he put on them.
You're right. And then there's Wozniak again, still bringing up that issue of giving credit to the Apple II team. That was clearly important to him, something Jobs just didn't want to do. But then you've got John Scully coming back, and they reconcile. It's amazing to see these two, after such a huge falling out, find some common ground years later.
That reconciliation, it provides a kind of closure to that whole chapter in Apple's history, doesn't it? In their conversation, they talk about Jobs being adopted, and Jobs even admits that maybe that's why he needs so much control. It's a moment of vulnerability, a moment where you understand what shaped him a little better.
Yeah. And then the climax, emotionally, at least when it comes to Jobs' personal life, it's that breakthrough he has with Lisa. He apologizes, tells her he was poorly made, and he finally admits that the original Lisa computer, it was named after her. It's a huge turning point.
It is. That scene where he accepts her, apologizes, it's incredibly powerful. And when he promises to make sure she has more music in her pocket, he sees her Walkman. Right? It's such a beautiful foreshadowing of the iPod. And it symbolizes that growing connection they're forming. And that last gesture, giving her that McPaint drawing, it ties their story together, doesn't it?
It does. It brings those three acts full circle. It shows how his relentless pursuit of technological innovation was intertwined with these really human, really messy relationships. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Talk about the making of the film itself. I mean, it's got a pretty impressive team behind it.
Oh, yeah. The story of how this film got made, it's interesting on its own.
Yeah.
So after they got the rights to Isaacson's book, they brought in Aaron Sorkin to write the screenplay. He's known for his dialogue, that rapid-fire, super sharp dialogue. And at first, they were talking to David Fincher to direct, with Christian Bale as Jobs. But in the end, it was Danny Boyle directing, and Michael Fassbender got the role of Jobs.
And the casting is really interesting. Fassbender doesn't look a lot like Jobs, right?
Yeah.
But he focused on capturing his essence, that intensity, that charisma. And Kate Winslet, she spent a lot of time with the real Joanna Hoffman to prepare for the role, to really understand their relationship. It shows how dedicated they were, that they wanted to go beyond just imitating. Yeah,
Winslet's performance as Hoffman, it's nuanced. You can tell she really understood Hoffman's intelligence, her loyalty, but also her willingness to stand up to Jobs. And Seth Rogen, who plays Wozniak, he met with Wozniak too, to pick up on his mannerisms, his perspective. It added this layer of authenticity to the film, even with Sorkin's very stylized dialogue.
One of the most striking things about the film, visually, is how they use different film formats for each act. 16 millimeters for 1984, 35 millimeter for 1988, and then digital for 1998. It's subtle, but it's so effective at separating those time periods. And maybe it even reflects the evolution of technology itself. Think about how it affects you as a viewer, how that graininess of the 16 millimeter almost makes you feel that rawness of the early days of personal computing.
It was a brilliant choice by Boyle and the cinematographer, Alwyn Cookler. That 16 millimeter, it feels more immediate, right? More raw. It fits the energy of that early Macintosh era. Then they switched to 35 millimeter for the next T launch, which takes place in this grand opera house, and it adds this element of theatricality. And then the iMac launch in 1998, it's all digital, super clean, crisp. It mirrors Apple's designs at the time, that whole modern tech aesthetic. And even the turtleneck becoming this key part of Jobs' image in the 1998 section. It's interesting because he didn't actually wear it at that specific launch, but it was a deliberate choice, a way to symbolize him becoming this icon, arriving at his vision, as the costume designer put it.
It's a great example of how filmmakers use visual cues to convey deeper meaning. The turtleneck is so locked to Steve Jobs now that seeing it in that last act, it instantly tells you this is the Steve Jobs everyone knows.
Yeah. We should mention the music, too, by Daniel Pemberton. It follows that three-part structure as well. Analog synthesizers for 84, more orchestral stuff for 88, and then purely digital sounds for the iMac era. It shows how every element of the film worked together to create a cohesive experience.
Pemberton's score is fantastic. It really adds to the storytelling. The analog sounds take you right back to the tech of the early 80s. The orchestral pieces heighten the drama of the next T launch. And then the digital soundscape fits the sleekness of the iMac perfectly.
So critically, the film was a hit. Lots of praise for Boyle's directing, Sorkin's writing, and the acting, especially Fassbender and Winslet. It was nominated for and even won some Academy Awards and Golden Globes. Box office, though, not so much.
That's true. Despite all the acclaim, it didn't do that well financially. There could be a few reasons for that. Maybe there were just too many Steve Jobs stories out there at the time. Maybe Sorkin's dialogue was too intense for some audiences. Or, like you said, maybe Fassbender not looking exactly like Jobs played a role.
Yeah. Which brings us to the question of, historical accuracy. This is where things get interesting because you get these really different opinions. Some people who knew Jobs praised aspects of the film, while others had very different memories. It shows you how subjective memory can be, how differently people can interpret things.
Totally. Steve Wozniak, he saw an early version and said he felt like he was watching the real Steve Jobs and everyone else, which is a pretty big endorsement. John Scully liked Jeff Daniels' portrayal of him, but then you have Bill Atkinson, one of the original Macintosh guys. He thought it was totally inaccurate, even called it history distortion field, referring to Sorkin's writing. He did think Winslet's Joanna Hoffman was perfect, though, which just shows how strong her performance was.
And Edwin Catmull from Pixar felt like the film missed this key part of Jobs' later life, that he became much kinder, more empathetic than he was in the movie. Walt Mossberg, he covered Apple for years, knew Jobs well, and he thought the film exaggerated the negative stuff and felt kind of fictionalized, even though it used real names in events. It just shows how differently people experienced Jobs.
Danny Boyle, the director, he said they took some creative liberties, like Shakespeare did, to try and capture a deeper truth about the characters and relationships. And Aaron Sorkin, he's admitted that a lot of the dialogue isn't word for word what was said.
Right.
So it's important to remember that it's a dramatic interpretation inspired by true events, but not a documentary.
Right. So as we wrap up our look at the film Steve Jobs, I think it's clear that it gives you a compelling, even if maybe dramatized, look at some crucial moments in his life and all these complex relationships that shaped him. What do you think are the biggest takeaways for the listener from seeing Jobs' history through this lens?
I think the biggest thing is that tension between his vision, his drive, and the personal cost, both for him and those around him. You see the seeds of his success, but also some of his failures. In those key moments, you get a sense of just how much pressure there was, how complicated it all was to bring these revolutionary ideas to life.
Absolutely. And if you want to understand this guy, this incredibly influential figure in tech, in modern history, without reading a giant biography, this film is a great way to do it. As long as you keep in mind that it is a drama, a creative interpretation, it lets you experience these key moments in Steve Jobs' history in a really powerful way.
It's a great starting point for thinking about Steve Jobs, and it raises some interesting questions. Given all those different opinions about how accurate it is, about how it portrays him, what does that tell us about the difficulty of capturing someone so complex, so influential on film? How do our own ideas about him, the stories we've already heard, affect how we see the film? It's worth considering which version of Steve Jobs resonates with you most, and maybe even more importantly, why that is.
I think that's a great place to leave it. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.
My pleasure. Always fascinating to revisit these kinds of stories.